and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. And welcome tonight. We have a great guest. Unfortunately, Alejandro had to take someone to the airport and couldn't make the show. However, we did make an attempt to pre-record earlier. We did talk a little bit. So I actually want to talk about the conversation a little bit before I bring on our guest. And I'm real excited about our guest. I myself have had some interest in the aviation world in the past. And so I'm excited to talk to Dr. Todd Curtis. And he has his PhD in aviation risk assessment. And so he also has an interest in UFOs and has looked into the topic. And it's going to be really exciting. I can't wait to talk to him. So Alejandro, basically, when he and I were talking earlier today, he was talking basically about the Bob Lazar movie. He got a sneak preview in that movie. And I mentioned that if I had to bet on one side or the other whether the Bob Lazar story was true or not all the way through, I'd be more apt to doubt it than I would to think that it's those things really happened. Now, I'm not saying I do have an open mind. I'm going to keep my mind open, and I eventually will be watching the movie myself, because he said that this film really makes you ask a lot more questions. And he thinks it's, he said he was kind of like feeling the way I do, but he's kind of put it in his gray basket right now, trying to decide for sure whether, there's really something to it or not. One of the things that, I'm not going to give really a spoiler alert because I haven't seen it myself. The trailer is great, by the way. Anyone can find that on Google. But, as far as what happens in the film that he says will add some to the credibility is basically that there are independent people saying that they saw Bob Lazar in Area 51. They worked with him. One says, but he remains anonymous. And those people are going on the record with their names as well. What also came up was the person supposedly that gave him his clearance talks anonymously, voice altered and all that. So I always have a little bit of trouble with those type of interviews, whether to actually believe them or not. So we're live. Anyone can watch the show every Tuesday at 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's on YouTube. You can listen or watch live. And it's also on, someone is saying that there's no audio and on YouTube. So that is not good. Let me see. It's showing right here, full blast. Okay. Hang on, everyone. Let me just see if that is true. For some reason, I'm not able to. Oh, okay, it's over at KGRA Radio. The audio is down. Let's see. Hang on, everyone. I will figure out what's going on here. Okay, so the audio is on YouTube, and which means I'm just going to have to continue. I'm sorry about KGRA Radio. I'm not sure what's going on over there. All right, so hang on. I just got a message from over there, and I just have to try to read it. And just hang on, everybody. How come? Okay. All right, it's all set. Should be all set on KGR radio. Looks like I'll be doing a little editing for this podcast when it goes out. So let's start. I'm not going to start totally over again. Going to be talking to our guest about aviation safety and UFOs. His name is Dr. Todd Curtis. I'm real excited to talk to him. He'll be coming right up in a little bit here. And Alejandro could not make the show. I was going on talking about the Bob Lazar movie and my thoughts about him, whether I thought there was some real credence to his story or not. Really, I've been on the fence forever about it. If I were to bet, I'd bet that it's probably not so. But also, I do want to watch the movie because I understand the movie is quite convincing in a lot of ways. So that is coming out, and Jeremy Corbell's out there pumping that everywhere. And so it should be an interesting movie regardless. And so as I was mentioning ahead of time, people can watch this show for free on YouTube every Tuesday at 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, if all goes well, I should say. And over at KGRA Radio on Thursday nights, it's on over there at the Dark Matter Digital Network. People can watch it over there, and it's always up on YouTube. If you want to support the show, the first part of the show is always about 30 minutes to an hour for free. Anybody can listen to that as a podcast. If you wanted to listen to the full show on your media player, all you have to do is support us for a couple of dollars or more per month, or yearly payments, however you want to work that out. That information's over at podcastufo.com. And do check out the website. We do get some blogs in there. We also have a real active Facebook page. And you can like that, and every day it's updated. I try to update it on the weekends, but it's not always done on the weekends. But anyway, so I am getting ready to welcome our guest, and Todd Curtis. Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
And yes, and thank you for being here. And we kind of met in a kind of a roundabout way, actually, and I want to owe that in thanks to. Let me hang on just a second here. I want to give the thanks to Ray Stanford because you actually contacted me and you were looking to buy Ray's book, so you listened to the show, and that's how it all started. And I said, "Hey, wait a minute, you are an air safety guy. Let's talk about that." So. And I think it's fascinating that you have an interest in UFOs because it's it's kind of a taboo subject in the aviation field. And I guess I want you to talk about your background, but before we actually go there, can you also talk about, have you had any ridicule because of your interest in UFOs?
Very minor, primarily through the things I've published on my website. In the past, I've actually had a interview with Leslie Kean after a book came out about UFOs and government documents and generals. This was, I think, 2014. And also Richard Haynes of NARCAP. I interviewed him for one of my podcasts. And there was just some minor pushback, but nothing major.
I've actually, Richard's a great guy. I met him down in North Carolina several years ago. And real interesting guy. I really enjoyed meeting him and talking to him, but he won't come on my show, and the reason, he's very clear about it. He says, you have the word UFO in the title of your show, and I don't want to be associated with anything to do with UFOs, and that kind of gives you an idea of how the name is sort of tarnished or maybe overused and abused, because really it means an unidentified flying object, but people do associate it with aliens. You mentioned the word UFO. It's just like saying flying saucers. People are going to be critical of the word, and people interested in the field because they think you're talking, it's got to be aliens. What are your thoughts on all that?
Well, it's quite simple. From my perspective, which is my background's in aviation safety. I started off some years ago, oh my goodness, back in the 80s as a flight test engineer in the Air Force. I transitioned into the civilian side of things, working aviation safety. And I was at Boeing for quite a few years. During the development of the 777 was the main part of my time there. And that's where I really developed an interest in looking at all sorts of angles with respect to things that could be a threat to the aircraft, either on the ground or in the sky. And when it came to unknowns in the sky, well, clearly some of them are unknown phenomena that are weather-related and can be scientifically studied. But when they first are noticed by people, it might engender all sorts of fear. I remember reading a story quite a few years ago about jets and sprites, which are basically upper atmospheric lightning. They'd been observed by pilots decades ago. But it's the kind of thing where if these pilots, primarily military, had reported these things, even though these were later to be found scientifically valid, this was something that had nothing to do with flying the airplane and had nothing to do with their mission. And reporting that could put them on out of flight status. So even if there's nothing alien about it, reporting something that's unusual, that has nothing to do with the mission, could put your career in jeopardy. Same for the civilian world. Airline pilots are some of the most well-respected and also scrutinized professions out there. Any number of things that they do in their personal life could come back to haunt them in their professional life. And reporting on things in the sky that, again, have nothing to do with flying the airplane, have nothing to do with the operation of the aircraft, has nothing to do with the bottom line. It's not their interest to do so.
Would you, if you had to guess or theorize, would you say that it's a very small percentage of commercial pilots that will actually report an unidentified flying object?
I would say it's a vanishingly small, primarily because there's no formal process that the FAA or the Department of Defense or anyone else has out there that says, we are an official agency dealing with aviation matters. If you see something that's unusual, that could be a vehicle that is not made by Boeing or Airbus and is interesting and unusual, please report it to us. There's nothing like that. There are some ways that pilots or anyone else in society can report things to an official government body, but not explicitly for unknown phenomena such as this.
You mentioned Richard Haynes and NARCAP. So that is one organization. Thank goodness it's there. You know, there is a place for them to go. But one thing, and I've had I'm trying to remember the main person there right now on this show. It was actually my first YouTube show. He was on that, and we're friends. I just lost his name right now. But anyway, great guy, and he was willing to be on the show, even though it was, a show about UFOs. But I just wondered, do they contact anyone with the reports, or are those reports accessible? Like, to say, for instance, all of a sudden, the government may have an interest in a case. Do they actually contact NARCAP? Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of any official government outreach to organizations like NARCAP or the National UFO Reporting Center or other privately run organizations that collect, collate, and analyze unknown data, UFO data, unknown aerial phenomena data, call it what you will. I know of no government outreach to do that.
I see. I'm sort of surprised a little bit because, there's been a number of years, there's been speculation that MUFON, there's some type of connection there with MUFON, and I know it's conspiratorial, but there have been some links between the government and MUFON. Bob Bigelow. There's also, for instance, Ray Stanford, who was on the show. We talked one time about there was some shell company that was funding a MUFON event that actually had ties to the government. So it's pretty interesting, and I don't really know other than getting data, why they would be doing anything like that.
Well, who knows all the mysterious ways the government works? And government, in my opinion, isn't some monolithic entity. There are all sorts of institutions, organizations, individuals who have their own agendas. Some of them are consistent with major policy issues at a high level. Others could be personal interests. So the likelihood that some agent of government or some part of government had some funding going to private organizations like that, perfectly plausible. And again, keep in mind that organizations like NARCAP, MUFON, etc., they're private entities. They're not publicly traded. They don't have a requirement to have a full disclosure of their finances like a publicly traded company. And as a private company, they can have all sorts of things that are not necessarily nefarious, but certainly not open to the public.
Right. Now, how about your airsafe.com? Have you yourself been contacted by anyone about the UFO topic at all, or does that just
The
never...
only that never happens, except the occasional email that might have commented on one or two pieces of content I had, either on the podcast or on the website itself. But as far as outreach from government, the only thing I can say indirectly, looking at the logs of data and traffic that comes through, yes, there are some domain names that are related to large aviation organizations and government organizations that do visit my website. But keep in mind that the vast majority of my website deals with airline aviation safety and security events. Only a small event with things that could be related to UFOs. So could some of that traffic be related to that? Could be, but I don't have that level of detailed knowledge of who did what when.
What do you think about, I've talked to some skeptics that they say that an airline pilot is no better of an observer than anyone else. I disagree with that. What is your thoughts?
Well, if the airline pilot is observing a birthday party of a 4-year-old, yes, they'd be no different than the average person. But when it comes to looking at things in the sky, we're talking a completely different situation here. We're talking people who professionally study the sky. They understand at least a little bit about meteorology. They know something about the stars, what stars look like. It could be an aircraft if you're not looking carefully. Satellites, for example, the ISS, which if it's flying over you, if you didn't know any better, you'd mistake it for an aircraft. They know what things look like from above, from below. They know what looks normal with respect to other traffic. They've seen traffic, airline pilots, they've seen traffic at their altitude above and below for years because flying to and fro around the world, there are various air routes that other airliners take. So they would, on a regular basis, see aircraft of all types, military and civilian. So to say that they would not be able to recognize something that's out of the ordinary, be it a natural phenomenon or something that looks like a controlled flight of some sort of vehicle, that's absurd. Airline pilots are a cut above compared to most other people.
Have you yourself ever had any type of sighting?
There's only one time where I could say that I had a sighting of something that just didn't make any sense to me. This was in Seattle. And I say this because I happened to talk to a coworker a couple days later. He saw the same event. He was about 20 miles south of me. What this was a very high-flying, extremely slow-moving, and very, very stable contrail. I've been looking at contrails all my life, and I've seen them from large aircraft, small aircraft. This didn't behave like any contrail I'd seen before. I'm not saying it was an unusual vehicle. It just looked to be a lot slower than usual. And I thought, okay, maybe it's a U-2. But from where I was in Seattle, I was looking to the northwest, more or less toward the northwest corner of the state of Washington. And I'm thinking, I don't know of any flight activity that's over there that would make sense. There is a naval air station in Whidbey Island that would be north of my position. That would be between where this contrail was and where I was looking at it from. But nothing at Whidbey Island was that kind of aircraft. I stood there and looked at it for 20, 30 minutes. So much so that I said, I'm going to see if this thing moves. I'm going to look at a distant object here, which was like a radio tower. I'm going to see if this contrail moves in any way, shape, or form with this radio tower in the foreground. And it did, but extremely slowly. And again, I had a colleague, I was at Boeing at the time, I had a colleague of mine, I talked to him about it, he said, oh yeah, I saw that too. And I thought, if he saw this roughly the same angle to the horizon, and he was like 20 miles south of me, this thing had to be a fairly decent distance away. Was it over Canada? Was it over the Pacific? I couldn't tell you. Never seen that kind of contrail before or since.
Wow, that's interesting. Now, we talked earlier about the term UFO. Is that a taboo? I think you mentioned in one of your emails to me. It's kind of a word you didn't really let leave your lips when you were talking to certain people. So
that's right.
Yeah.
I was actually interviewed for a History Channel show some years ago about UFO events related to airliners, including the Japan Airlines cargo 747 in Alaska in the 1980s. And I was trying, to best of my ability, to not say the word UFO during the interview, because I thought, okay, if you're going to put only 7 seconds of me out of this show and put it out somewhere and saying, hey, this is what Todd Curtis believes, if I had the words UFO coming out of my mouth, that would be one thing. Now, if they saw the entire show, they could see it in context. But knowing a little bit about how the media works, the juiciest soundbite is the one that ends up everywhere. So I was very careful in that show.
That's right. That's right. So I do want to bring up and talk about the JAL 1628 case because that's fascinating. That's I think it's one of the all-time great cases out there. But before we do that, we're going to be going to break in a short bit. And also, I wanted to ask you, with your background and your website and your stature, so to speak, do people take you seriously? Like if you actually wanted to inquire about an event, I mean, do you have an ability to contact, like, for instance, the Irish, the incident that happened? Do you have the ability to contact an organization and ask about the research or something on that?
I typically don't do that for a couple of reasons. First, and I didn't talk about this ahead of time with you, which are basically giving an advertisement for my first book, which was called Understanding Aviation Safety Data. And I wrote this based on my work when I was in graduate school at MIT and plus my work at Boeing. How do I go about finding things? There is so much out there that is in the open, waiting to be picked over, that all you have to do is, in my opinion, know how to systematically ask and answer the question and look for those sources of data that are reputable enough where you can address those questions. So the Irish Aviation Authority, for instance, they might be investigating an event that happened a few weeks ago. Well, if a report ever comes out, I'm sure it'll be available somewhere. So rather than calling someone at the authority, I'll just search their website, search various fora on the internet. And if someone says, hey, the report just got published, here's the URL, that's my way of getting the information.
Okay. So you kind of go about it the same way that anybody could. You don't try to use your status, so to speak, in any type of way, special way.
Now, and again, this brings up something even further back. I mentioned how I was an Air Force flight test engineer. Well, my last assignment at the Air Force was at the National Security Agency and the National Cryptologic School. And one of the things I learned from being in and around the intelligence community is real simple. Most of the really, 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 really good information is out there in the open already. It's more a question of knowing how to look and where to look. You don't need the fancy satellites or James Bond or any of that nonsense. There's plenty of information out there.
Yeah. And us, I wouldn't think we're too far apart in age. You're probably a bit younger than me. But we have seen the times going back to the analog days where everything was, papers and files and all that. And now everything is available online. Have you ever, in any of the work that you've done in regards to air safety, used FOIA, Freedom of Information requests for any documents?
That's a good question. I actually wrote about how to use FOIA in my first book, but I haven't myself had to resort to that because typically, because I know enough institutions in the industry, if I really needed something really obscure, I'd simply go after that particular database or that particular library, or I might even have somebody in the industry who'll give me a heads up on it. But actively going after a FOIA information, I haven't had to do that.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. So we are ready to go to break. So my guest this evening is Todd Curtis, and this is Martin Willis with Podcast UFO, and we will be right back right after these messages.
All right, Mark, we're in the clear, my friend, and we've got 4 minutes and 40 seconds break.
Okay, I heard 4 minutes something seconds. So let's see. I'm just going to look quickly through. There's people posting some questions up on the chat room here, and there was no filming actually of the. Let's talk a little bit about the Ireland, and we can talk about that during the regular show too. But there was no filming of that in particular that I heard about. I know there was there's a voice recorder, but there's no access to any. No pilot took any pictures or film or anything of that, as far as you know.
And to my knowledge, there was no radar trace of that either.
No radar trace, and which is interesting. And you probably know this already, but that's not uncommon for UFOs, even when people see large structured vehicles. You know?
Well, let me be more specific. When it comes to radars used for air traffic control, they're using primarily transponders to get information from the aircraft.
Right. Yeah.
Rather than primary radar return off of skin paint, the kind of thing a military radar would use. So you could have something fly directly in line of sight of a air traffic control radar. If there's no transponder on, may not see that aircraft at all.
I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that the transponder was their main source. I thought it was always, the typical radar. So, yeah, interesting. And there's a lot of talk about, vehicles. There is no transponder in these vehicles when they see them. But that's interesting. So, we have 3 minutes or so left in this break, or just about that. And we didn't really talk much about your background and what got you started in the aviation field. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Again, we have a couple minutes left.
Oh, certainly. I grew up in the 60s and early 70s in Texas. And back then, this was during the height of the Apollo program, actually the latter part of the Gemini program and the Apollo program. I remember watching Gemini launches when I was in elementary school. I would have been like first, second grade, because we're talking about 65 or so. And like most other people in the country, I was glued to the television when the space shots happened, and the astronauts in Texas were right up there with the Dallas Cowboys as far as how much fame they had. So the fact, and also to NASA's credit, the public affairs office was very, very generous. I'm some little kid, 9, 10, 12 years old, writing in longhand to the public affairs office. They would send me tons of stuff, mission reports, photographs, all kinds of good stuff. I had drawers full of that stuff growing up.
Wow.
So that was one of the reasons I thought, hey, this might be something interesting. I also had an uncle who was living in California who was in the aerospace business as an engineer, and another uncle who worked at Douglas on the assembly line. So I didn't think of aviation as something that was, beyond the realm. It's like, hey, I got a couple uncles doing this. I know that there's a business out there, and there might still be some things, even though the space program sort of like wound down big time by the time I got to college. And I decided to keep on with my interest in aviation, learn how to fly when I was in college and grad school. And it took me several years because I kept running out of money.
Yeah.
And, when I went into the Air Force, it was explicitly to work in one of the aviation research offices. I ended up going to Edwards, was there for a couple of years, and worked on the F-16 Lantern program, which was some of the early iterations of infrared targeting and navigation systems.
Wow.
And this was, again, 84, 85 timeframe. And the stuff they had was working great under the conditions of the Mojave Desert. But it's like, if they had to do this in the Fulda Gap over in Europe for, the Warsaw Pact coming over the hill, this isn't going to work at all. And of course, a few years later, the first time this technology got used big time was in the first Gulf War. And the whole world saw those pictures and was like, wow, this is amazing stuff. Wow. So I hate to say this, but that was some of the greatest marketing ever for that kind of technology on military aircraft.
Race, we're about ready to go back, right?
Yeah, we're 55 seconds, Martin.
Oh, 55 seconds? Okay.
Oh, my goodness.
Wow, that's a lot. Oh, so, yeah.
45.
You're going to count down all the way from there. So, all right, I got the timer going on that. So, interesting. And was that hard to get an education in aviation?
No, it wasn't hard at all. Again, I went off to engineering school, and I ended up going to Princeton for engineering school. And I went into electrical engineering because I knew enough about where things were going that aviation already had a big retrenchment a few years before. And I thought, well, gee, if I were to go in aviation in a discipline where I could actually go into another business if I had to, what engineering would I follow? And I ended up doing electrical, statistical analysis, signal processing, that kind of thing.
All right. I think we're ready to go back, right, Race?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right.
Stand by. Count you down.
All set?
All right, here we go. In 5, 4, 3, 2.
All right, welcome back. My guest this evening is Dr. Todd Curtis, and we're talking aviation, and we are aviation and UFOs, and really enjoying it. And I mentioned, before we went into break, that I wanted to talk more about the JAL 1628 case. Unfortunately, what happened to the pilot of that situation. And so for the person that's not aware of that whole case in particular, are you able to walk us through exactly what you know about it?
Well, I'm going from my rapidly fading memory, but this was in the early 1980s. It was a cargo flight, JAL cargo flight, in the Alaskan airspace north of Anchorage. And the crew noticed several anomalous objects or phenomena out there, including what looked like a UFO that was several times larger than the 747 itself. And they not only saw this with their eyes, they radioed into air traffic control, and they also got in touch with the military, I believe, out of Elmendorf Air Force Base. So you had several physical eyes on it, as well as radar tracking of this. And the FAA had radar tapes of this, and of course, they had a lot of transcripts of what went on. And subsequent to that event, there was a meeting apparently involving several branches of government other than the FAA. And a lot of this was supposed to be confiscated and kept quiet. But one of the FAA managers who was there was some of the data that was not required to be taken away, I believe, by the FBI. I might be wrong on that. And he eventually kept that for himself and released that to the public later on. So the public only got wind of this with respect to detailed information about what was done on the FAA side, because this FAA manager decided to keep the data and then release it when it was convenient. And of course, the captain of this aircraft was put on non-flying duties for several years before he can go back to flying again, strictly because of his role in reporting this and being open and honest about it.
Yeah, that's right. And I know that actually NARCAP actually got him reposted in his position. Actually, they fought for him and actually was able to get him back in the left seat. So that case, though, I consider it, one of the best. Like I said, just because of all the evidence that leads to that actually really happening, and the description of the vehicle, the size, and how it was tracking them, it was following them, and they did a circle. I believe they did a circle when they were told to, and the thing was basically following around this big 360-degree circle they were doing, shaped like a walnut, and with smaller vehicles coming out of it. Just a real fascinating case. And I know that I've heard that the pilot did not want to talk about it afterwards, and I think that's a shame that when someone is threatened, their job is threatened. But he's probably retired now, or possibly retired now. I don't know exactly.
Oh, that was over 30 years ago,
Yeah,
so
so
I'm pretty
he would
sure he was a senior pilot. He'd be retired by now.
Yeah. And I wonder if that's something he ever, wants to talk about. If anyone's ever tried to reach him, it may be difficult to do, but still. And also, one of the things that has occurred to me about this case, I wonder in Japan if this case is talked about much there, or if it's even talked about at all.
That's a good question. I have never even explored that.
Yeah. So I have some questions that came in from a listener to the show named Carrie, and let's see. So I'll start out with this one here. Has there ever been any analysis of the total number of UFO sightings reported to the FAA and NARCAP? And if so, would you know the differences between the two?
Well, I can speak to the FAA part of that. I've been looking at FAA publications of all types for various issues over the years, from laser strikes to aircraft, bird strikes to aircraft, etc. Never come across anything that's even remotely associated with UFO sightings or unusual, unexplained phenomena that may have affected the aircraft systems or the air crew behavior. Never seen anything like that. As for NARCAP's analysis, I've delved a little bit into what they've done, but I'm not totally familiar with the full range of things they've published over the years.
Now, I want to address that because obviously there has been many issues that have happened, but you're saying that does the FAA, would you believe the FAA just plain does not want to hear about them? Or would they just tell the pilot? Is it possible they tell the pilot, use some other source of reporting if you feel like you have to report this?
Well, certainly when it comes to reporting, they would say that because there isn't, to my knowledge, any clear program in place to report those kinds of events. I mentioned bird strikes and laser strikes at aircraft. I mentioned those two specifically because I've been involved in the bird strike world for a while. And I analyzed laser strikes a good bit because there was a very good database of that on the FAA website. And in my years working with the FAA or going to the Department of Transportation and their research facilities, there's all kinds of reports out there, but I've never come across anything that deals with anything remotely like UFOs.
Well, all right, let's talk about, for instance, we just talked about the JAL 1628. Obviously, that there was a report, but it kind of fell short there. And then there's the O'Hare Gate C-17 incident that happened, and I know that there was an attempt to report that to the FAA. What happens in a situation like that?
Well, this is a situation, for those who are unfamiliar with it, where you basically have some sort of vehicle, aircraft, drone, whatever it was, it really doesn't matter, violating the airspace under one of the most critical pieces of aviation infrastructure in the United States. You have something flying over the terminals at O'Hare, that's interrupting air traffic. That's a hazard to aviation. So there's no two ways about it. That was clearly something that was a straight-up violation of FAA regulations. And if there was a pilot associated with that vehicle, that pilot would have been sanctioned, might have had their license yanked. Besides that, even if you're not talking about the FAA, you're talking about something that could be a threat to the infrastructure of aviation. That's something that is responsibility of the FBI, some other sort of federal law enforcement, or for that matter, Chicago law enforcement. In spite of that, I've seen nothing in the way of any kind of report, any kind of acknowledgement even, that this was being looked at with any seriousness by the responsible parties who should have been doing this. Now, I don't want to make a joke about this, but if ISIS claimed the next day, hey, that was us flying that drone, we disguised it so it looked like a UFO so we can fool you guys next time around, there would have been a completely different response. But there was no responsible party that came forward. There was no evidence of any responsible party being associated with it. It was a true unknown as to the source and motivation of whatever or whomever was flying that vehicle, assuming it was a physical vehicle and not, let's say, a projection of some sort.
Right. Also, that it went up and pierced a perfect hole in the cloud. I don't even know how something would even do that. Maybe the high rate of speed or something. That's just an unusual situation. But enough people saw that to report it as well.
Now, it's also a technological situation here. At the time, I believe it was 2006, this was before YouTube. This was before everyone and their brother had a smartphone with them. If that were to happen today, it's very likely there would be tens, dozens of people who would have not only been an eyewitness to it, but would have had still photographs and video of this. And no matter what kind of suppression any level of government would try to do, it would be out there in the wild within minutes. There'll be no way to stop information, or at least knowledge of this event, no way to stop that from going out to the world.
I agree. I agree, but not wholeheartedly, because I can understand that a lot of times when people have a sighting like something like that unexplained, the last thing in the world they think of is their phone or camera, but not everyone. Like, for instance, if I saw something like that, I'd be grabbing for my phone, but it's only because I do what I do and I had a sighting myself. But I got to tell you, when I had my sighting, my phone was not anywhere near me, but still, it never even occurred to me because I was in awe and just thinking, what the heck is that? And I think, there's a lot of talk about this subject, and I'm glad you brought it up because, the skeptics, I see it a lot out there in postings and stuff. Why aren't there, tons and tons of videos and pictures of UFOs? And I know my iPhone, if I try to take something at night, even though it's an iPhone 8, it does a terrible job. But still, that's the big question. If there's so many iPhones out there, how come we're not seeing more UFOs? And, a lot of it, I tried to take a picture of a blimp a few years ago, you know how slow they move, and I couldn't even get my phone out in time before it was over Boston Common. I couldn't even get my phone out in time to take a picture of it. So, you know, I
You
don't
just
know.
made me flash back to 1981 when I took a picture of a blimp with a pinhole camera, of all things. But that's another story for another day. You know, this is an ageism sort of comment I'm about to make. People of a certain age, they may not have their phones at the ready. People who are younger than that certain age have the phones out all the time to the point that it annoys the heck out of me. I've seen more than a couple of, you know, emergency evacuation from aircraft videos where the person, a young person, would have the phone in their hand, looking back at them running, oh my gosh, the plane's on fire. It's like, dude, wait until you're safely away before you turn the camera on. So again, certain ages of people are more apt to whip out their phone for any reason or no reason at all. So in the future, I think we'll have more videos.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, going back to pilots, okay, I've been in the cockpit a number of times myself. Not flying, but I mean, in a jet. I had a short time where I was involved in the aviation field, so I flew, and you can see like so far out in front of you, you know, on a good clear day. It's amazing how much of a visual capability you have up in the cockpit. And you're covering a lot of ground. It seems like you're going slow because you're just, you know, 40,000 feet or thereabouts. But do you think there's a lot of sightings from pilots? Would you guess that there's a lot of sightings from
I would
pilots?
say that there are a lot of sightings of things that are unexplained or unexplainable. It could be something that might be natural, meteors, etc. And it could be other things, military aircraft being tested. And again, talking about, let me talk a little bit about what you just said. You're sort of minimizing your experience in aviation. You were a certified aviation professional, you know, had to go through formal training, had to deal with, you know, passengers in the airline business as a flight attendant. So you're an insider. So that said, as far as how well you can see in the aircraft, I had another flashback. Again, maybe it's an age thing. I keep getting flashbacks. I was flying a glider over Princeton. They had a glider club there back in the 70s when I was a student. It was a very clear day. It was about 1,500 feet. The instructor said, Todd, I've got the controls. Look to the left and right. What do you see? Over my left shoulder, I could see New York. I could see the statue of the Verrazano Narrows, World Trade Center, Empire State Building. Look over on the other side, I could see downtown Philadelphia. And I'm in a little glider 1,500 feet above central New Jersey, and I could see on either side of the state. So if you're at 30,000 feet, clear night, no clouds for miles, you can imagine how far you can see.
Right. Yeah, I've never talked about the fact that yes, indeed, I was a flight attendant I took a sabbatical from the antique auction business for about a year and a half, and I decided to try out to be a flight attendant. I was with Pan Am 3, and it was and I was trained for many weeks, and really enjoyed. I loved it actually. I was actually in Guantanamo Bay when the Taliban were being brought in. The first Taliban were being brought in, and I was there with a government contract, and our plane actually had a fuel spill, and we were stuck there for hours. It was very interesting while they circled around with the Taliban prisoners. So that's going back to, and I was also during, 9/11. I was not. I was at home when that happened, but the whole airline industry completely changed, and I'm sure you saw that as well.
Oh, most definitely.
Yeah. Precautions. Take the plane apart. Look for razor cutters. All that stuff. It was really, really interesting. So there, I'm out of the closet. I was a flight attendant for about a year and a half, and I got to travel. I did it for travel, and boy, did I travel! I had a lot of fun, a lot of island fun, and a lot of fun.
You mentioned earlier about will pilots or anyone report something if they have it. I think there are many, many, many good photographs and videos of unexplained phenomena out there, but for the average person, are they going to, take the steps necessary to put it out there? Even to put something on YouTube, which is fairly simple, it means you not only have to have the photograph or the video, you have to have a YouTube account, you have to upload it, and frankly, most people are lazy. They might be content to just show it to their friends, hey, look what I saw, and taking it no further than that. And if it is on YouTube, speaking of YouTube and videos, there's so much fake stuff out there from everyone's Final Cut Pro or whatever kind of thing of fake UFO pictures on the internet that just having a video that shows what seems to be a UFO, my first thought would be, okay, is this Photoshop or is this real?
I don't think
if
it's
one
gonna,
video.
Yeah, it's not going to get any better, but keep going. Yeah.
Well, if it's one person doing it, it's one thing. But if you have multiple people doing it from different angles, different kinds of cameras, film and motion picture, and you have eyewitness testimony, if you have a whole bunch of things together, throw in there a radar return from the FAA, now we're talking. Sure, one or two of those might be fake, but they can't all be fake. So if you have some event that's witnessed by a whole bunch of people and recorded in various ways by a whole bunch of people, stands a better chance of rising above the usual noise level.
Yes, there's actually been some things on the dome. I don't know if you ever saw that UFO, that recording. That was recorded by several people, but they planned it. It was all planned in the time.
Oh, that was the one of Dome of the Rock?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's a real good one too. I mean, but so there are situations where there are, people in cahoots. But you're right. Anything on YouTube, it's kind of, goes opposite the justice system. It has to be guilty till proven innocent, basically, when you're looking on YouTube, because there's a lot of debris out there. There's a lot of, like you said, CGI and hoaxing.
In the world of aviation safety, there's all sorts of events that happen that are extremely rare. But the thing is, they might be extremely rare, but they're not one of a kind. If something happens every 5 or 10 million flights, after a while there'd be enough evidence, hey, we have 4 or 5 cases here. Now we're seeing a pattern. If you see a one-of-a-kind thing, let's say the JAL event, and you never see that again, how can you develop a pattern out of that? So one of the difficulties for extremely rare events that are also unreported or underreported is that you may not have a population of events or case studies to make any sort of reasonable judgment off of them. And this goes, forget about UFOs, even when it comes to a risk to aviation safety. This is something I did more than a couple of times, making the case that something is a problem that should be addressed. Not only do you have to recognize that it happens and have to get some sort of population of events happening, then you have to deal with the bureaucracy of the situation. If you're going to change how airplanes are produced, let's say, you probably have to change the regulations at some point. To change the regulations, you just can't have one person screaming and hollering from the top of the hill. You have to have consensus within the industry that this is an issue that should be addressed. There should be a systematic way of doing so. And once we figure this out, we should all agree that we will enforce this to the letter around the world. So it's hard enough when it comes to something that is recognizable as being a hazard to people on board an aircraft. It's even harder if it's something that is not recognized as a hazard, may not have any direct impact on the physical operation of the aircraft, may have an effect on how people respond. Again, that's more of a training issue. But even if it were that, let's say seeing something unusual caused air crews to behave abnormally. They're using procedures off the cuff. They're making maneuvers with the aircraft they shouldn't. Well, in many cases, since this is something that may not hit the airplane or damage the airplane, the response might be, look, we already have procedures in place for it. What if you see something that's not at your altitude but in the vicinity? Should you take any kind of evasive action? Yes or no? Well, if you shouldn't have taken evasive action if this were an airplane, and you took evasive action because you didn't think it was an airplane, were you doing the right thing by taking matters into your own hands, or should you have stayed with procedure? So again, it's not a simple issue, and how that issue gets resolved depends on the situation.
Yeah, I understand all that, and also I know that crashes and things that have happened, they kind of have to be dissected into how, and a lot of times it's a multiple of a human error. One thing after another, not following procedure or doing something, paying attention to the wrong thing or whatever it is. I've watched some of your videos and how you've looked into that, which I think is fascinating too. We're going to be going to break here shortly. But as far as people redirecting an airline around something that they are seeing, an unidentified object. Are there any cases that you can think of where that situation happened?
When it comes to civil aviation and airliners, I can't think of anything where there was some sort of action taken that merited being reported. For example, if you depart from your assigned altitude against ATC recommendations, that's something that will be reportable, and it may even lead to some sort of reprimand. And if that has ever happened with respect to an unknown object, I can easily see a situation where someone violated their altitude for whatever reason, and they would rather take the punishment and say, I did this because I wasn't paying attention. They'd rather do that than say, I did this because I saw a giant walnut-shaped thing 5 times the size of a 747 coming right at me.
Yeah. I think we can talk a little bit about the recent Irish incident. We talked briefly about it, but there has, as far as you know, do you think that's going to be looked into seriously?
It's hard to know. There was a report that the Irish Aviation Authority, their version of the FAA, was going to make some sort of report or look into it. What that will entail, that remains to be seen. And again, this was an event where there were several aircraft that reported seeing something. But to my knowledge, none of those aircraft did anything out of the ordinary. They didn't have to deviate from their flight plan. They didn't have to do any sort of evasive maneuver. There was no effect on the aircraft systems. It was just something highly unusual that was seen by multiple pilots, reported air traffic control. And one part of the thing that would be looked into, and it should be seriously looked into, was this some sort of military activity or flight test activity, let's say from a manufacturer who's testing out a new design? That happens all the time, but just because it's a new design, just because it's a proprietary or secret thing, doesn't mean you don't follow the rules.
Right.
You can't just go willy-nilly into the air lanes and run your aircraft in front of airliners without telling the FAA what you're going to do. And, there's, I'm sure, the procedures in place for secret aircraft to do their thing without revealing to the FAA what exactly that aircraft is. Now, if those procedures aren't being followed, well, then someone should be dinged for it.
Now, you just mentioned air lanes. Are they like, do they just completely cover, like, to say the United States, for instance? Or are they in specific areas? I know there's places that have to be avoided, more or less. But do they just spread? I know there are different altitudes and all that these lanes are in. But how do they actually, what's the web like? Is it all over the country?
It's all over the world, really, because in the days before satellite, let's say the days before GPS, navigation over land masses was based on various kinds of radio beacons spread around the country, around the world. And you would have these IFR high altitude charts that would have not the land masses and the rivers and such, which we see on a VFR chart, but would have, okay, this is, corridor XYZ or whatever. Here's the radio beacon, the type, the frequency, et cetera, et cetera. And you would navigate from waypoint to waypoint. As we go forward into the future, because we have a much more sophisticated navigational system in place, you can go waypoint to waypoint from physical waypoints based on radio beacons of various types, or it could be a virtual waypoint. So depending on where you're flying to, where you're flying from, what kind of traffic's in the area, and what air traffic control can do with you, you can do something that is a great circle route, the shortest path between between 2 points, or you can do some other path. So you mentioned various kinds of restricted airspace. There's various kinds of restrictions from VFR aircraft not flying without IFR type equipment in certain areas, especially near busy airports. You have military training areas, which may be active only some parts of the day or some parts of the year, where the air traffic control, FAA, for instance, could give you the authorization to fly through that. Then you have other restricted areas that you can't do anything with, regardless. For example, try flying over the White House.
Yeah, right.
I wouldn't if I were you.
Okay, it's time to go to a break. So my guest tonight is Dr. Todd Curtis, and we're talking about aviation and UFOs. And this is Martin Willis with KGRA Radio. We'll be right back right after these messages.
All right, Martin, we're in the clear. We've got just over 4 minutes in this break.
Got it. Okay, thank you. All right, so I'm going to take a look to see. Here is a question here. Has your guest, this is in the chat room, and Beach Bum Bob wants to know, has your guest ever looked into public FAA radar records, unknown flying objects in or around southern Catalina Island in Southern California? That's out where the Tic Tac. Have you heard about the Tic Tac?
I've heard about the Tic Tac,
Yeah.
which came out last year in the New York Times article, and apparently had been floating around there beforehand with an article, like, I think it was in the Drive that had an article about that some months or years before.
Yeah.
So, and that's well, that happens on a regular basis. You have your major media, which on occasion has something. Then you have non-major media, independent media, websites like my own. They might have something interesting, tantalizing, and whatnot, but it just doesn't catch the attention of major media. Now, speaking personally about my website, airsafe.com, I'm constantly trying to get broader attention drawn to some issues. And sometimes I'm able to do that. Most times I'm not.
Right, okay. Just looking to see if there's any other questions up here in the chat room here for you. Let's see. We're going to be taking calls after this break. Let's see, lots of stuff but I'm not seeing. Oh, here's a question right here.
Safety.
What do you think about the recent Ireland sighting? Well, we were just talking about that. And people are saying, though, that a few astronomers are saying they think it's an astronomical event like a meteor or something. But according to what I've read about it, it doesn't seem to behave like that. So,
I'll hold out that there might be some astronomical phenomena that we're simply not aware of that doesn't behave like meteors.
Yeah.
And that may behave in the fashion we just saw. And again, it may be something physical, it may be something not physical. Is this some sort of electromagnetic phenomena that's going on? Ball lightning, and then some. Who knows? I'm not a scientist of atmospheric things like that, but certainly there are some energetic events from ball lightning to jets and sprites, other kinds of electromagnetic phenomena, which occur in nature, which are either not very well understood or not very well observed.
Yeah, I think you mentioned sprites, and you mentioned that earlier. Those are really bizarre for the person that's unaware of exactly what they are. They're actually lightning that goes up, and it has been observed actually by the International Space Station too, I believe. Haven't they seen sprites as well?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
I believe there are specific experiments flown in either 80s or the 90s on the space shuttle to study that very thing, and scientists on the ground who've been able to study it as well.
And where it goes, you think of lightning striking the ground. It makes the reason it's on its way to the closest object, to ground out. But do they know where these things are going, why they're going up, and what makes them start and stop?
I haven't read enough into that to be able to answer that, but I do know that those are open questions. For example, if you see a jet or sprite going up, what kind of cloud to ground or cloud to cloud lightning might be happening simultaneously with that? And would it be different in character from your run-of-the-mill lightning?
Okay. Do they teach pilots when they're training them, as far as you know? Do they teach them about things like ball lightning and atmospheric?
Well, in my training as a private pilot and my time as a flight test engineer in the military, that sort of thing didn't come up at all. The things that, I would say aerospace physiology was the thing that we got a lot of formal training in, or at least, having an idea of that sort of thing.
Right.
The effects of hypoxia, that sort of thing. And the fact that you could have for example, I can't remember the name for it. You could have a stationary light out there, but if you have a dark background and no other way of judging where it is, if you're sitting still, you might think the light's moving. So there's all sorts of optical illusions that can happen in the sky, especially at night.
I think we have to go back. Race, are we ready to go back?
Yes, sir.
All right. Count down when you're ready.
All right, stand by.
Okay, hang in, everyone.
All right.
Here we go.
Go commercial free
We're
for this final
Yes.
hour.
That's right.
All right, here we go, my friend.
Yep.
In 5, 4, 3, 2.
All right, welcome back, everyone. My name is Martin Willis. My guest tonight is Dr. Todd Curtis, and we are talking aviation safety and UFOs. We haven't really gotten into a lot of UFO cases, and I think it's fascinating to hear your thoughts on them. But also, I do want to let everyone know that we are open for calls, so if you want to call in, please do. Someone was listening to one of my shows today on YouTube and saw the call-in number and started calling me at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So just keep in mind, this show is this show number, that is only live or only usable during the show itself. And that number is 603-967-4030 if anyone wants to call in. What would you consider the most, besides the JAL case, most significant case involved in, a UFO was involved in when it comes to airline safety?
Oh, I think hands down would have to be the Phoenix Lights event. That's something where you not only had eyewitnesses, you had, clear evidence of people who should know better covering up during the event itself. Specifically, the governor of Arizona, who I believe was Fife Symington at that time, who was a former Air Force pilot. At the time of the event, I remember him giving a press conference where he was like, blowing off the idea and making a joke out of it, bringing some guy in an alien mask out in front of the press and saying, hey guys, take it easy on this.
Yeah.
Well, years later, he was on camera, and I can't remember which movie it was, where he basically said, yeah, I saw this thing when it happened. So here it was, a government official, governor of Arizona at the time, who was involved for whatever reason in squelching what was going on. Now, what went on? I don't know. And anyone who says they know, please have them call us. But if you have something that is seen from the ground and from the sky, from several different directions, from many different people, and it's over a wide area of a major metropolitan area, the potential for aviation safety is obvious. Clearly, if you were a pilot on the ground or in the sky and you saw something like this, you wouldn't need air traffic control to tell you not to run into the thing. But certainly, you could have other effects going on that would, for example, and again, I'm just speculating off the top of my head. What if you have something that is unknown over a major metropolitan area, and you call out NORAD, the F-15s in the case of Seattle not too long ago when someone stole an aircraft from SeaTac, and they show up in the area, and they see something that looks to be hostile, and they shoot at it. Well, it's not the UFO, quote unquote, but maybe some pilot who got in the way. So the potential exists if you have a confusing situation like this, that decisions could be made, actions could be taken that could put aircraft and people on them at risk.
That's right. And there was an Air Force pilot, supposedly, I don't know the details in this, that actually flew up to take a look at the object. I don't know if you heard about that.
I didn't hear about that.
Yeah, purportedly was scared out of his mind and didn't want to talk about it and was really, really shaken up. And, there's the possibility of that thing being miles wide, and what type of craft, a lot of people have mentioned that they believe it was probably some type of government experimental craft, and I can't really buy that argument for a number of reasons. We have a call coming in. I'm going to take it. And hang on just 1 second here. Okay. Caller, you are on with us at Podcast UFO. And what's your first name? Where are you calling from?
Well, thank you very much. I'm Malcolm from Punta Gorda, Florida. And
Hi.
I would like to ask your guest a question.
Sure.
Okay. Have you ever heard of a UFO stopping an aircraft engine in mid-flight the way they are reported to stop a car engine?
No, as a matter of fact, that I haven't heard. And speaking for large jet engines especially, having an engine shut down in flight for any reason is a very rare event. And so much so that if it happens, it would be of high interest, if not to the FAA, then to the engine manufacturer. So I would follow up that question by saying this. If there is any group that would have information about unusual stoppages of aircraft engines in flight, it would be the aircraft engine manufacturers.
Interesting.
Okay. Thank you very much.
That's it?
You're
All
welcome.
right. Malcolm, thanks for the call.
And further on that, if it's proprietary information that doesn't have to be reported to the FAA or the equivalent organization overseas, it could very well be something they keep under their hat for decades. Because again, a private company that's in a heavily regulated industry, they obviously have to adhere to regulations when the regulations exist. If there are no regulations to report a particular event, it may never be reported.
I'm sure you've heard there has been a military situation back in the 70s where the craft was disabled for a moment until I think it had a lock on or something, and the whole craft was disabled, and then basically came back on again. All the systems.
You're talking about the Tehran event in
That's right.
76,
Yeah.
I think it was.
Yeah, it was in the 70s. Mm-hmm. So you've done your research. You seem to know quite a bit about.
Well, when it comes to bizarre things that happen to aircraft, I tend to perk up no matter what the reason is for this. In fact, one of the things that I came across, which I found very interesting, Martin Caidin, who was the author behind $6 Million Man, had a book of short stories of extremely bizarre things that happened to aviators or to aircraft, from ghost airports to things in the sky. It's like, this is too weird to be fiction. Now, where did this guy get this stuff from? He created the $6 Million Man. I understand that, but this stuff was even well beyond that. And he said it was like true tales that he was reporting, not fiction that he made up. I can't remember the name of the book offhand, though.
Yeah. There was an Australian case of a young pilot. I actually have a blog on my website about it. But that was a private pilot. Do you pay attention to any, smaller plane, private planes in issues?
I pay attention to them when they come to public prominence and they may have an impact on safety or security. For example, one of the ones that I really paid attention to, not because of it had any major thing to do with aviation safety and security, but it spoke more to the privacy of a pilot. This is Harrison Ford when he had that crash in his World War II trainer near the Santa Monica airport a few years ago.
On a golf course, I believe, right?
On the golf course,
yeah.
Which was a spectacular piece of flying. I mean, if he were an average pilot, he would have been dead. But the thing that really struck me is the NTSB had a public docket on that event that was like a major airline crash. Very, very detailed, to the point that an average private pilot who gets in an accident, they might have a one-line something in the NTSB saying Cessna 1234 crashed and the pilot was seriously injured. Harrison Ford had several dissertations worth of stuff. So that speaks to, if the government is responsible for paying attention to things that really have an impact on safety and security, why the heck are they paying attention to Harrison Ford, who, to his credit, he wasn't killed. This had nothing to do with current production aircraft. It had no major effect on traffic flow in Los Angeles. It was just something they felt compelled to study to a very great degree. Do that to a Chicago event, an O'Hare event, please. Don't do it to Harrison Ford.
Wow, yeah, that's really interesting. Let's see. Another question that came in is, how does the FAA deal with unknown targets showing up on radar within U.S. airspace? And do the unknown targets get handed off to the military to deal with? Or I believe you kind of mentioned that a lot of things are not too well looked into with the FAA, so I don't even know if that question can be answered.
Well, I can't speak to the detailed procedures that happen inside the control centers there. I've talked to a few controllers over the years, and certainly things come up that aren't identified. For example, they might have a transponder code that was, they might ask them to change the transponder code so they can identify the aircraft. Well, if the aircraft changes the code and they see that on the radar, it's like, okay, we have communication involved with this pilot, and even if this pilot's flying the wrong way, at least they're responding to us. If they give a command to change the transponder code and there's no change to the transponder code, they might say to themselves, okay, what's the problem here? Is this someone who's deliberately doing something? Is this someone who is just lost? Is this none of the above? Do we call NORAD? What do we do here? So that's a situational sort of thing. It depends on the aircraft. It depends on the situation.
Now, I know, I think it was back in the 1990s, there was a commercial air flight. I'm not sure. I think it was over the States somewhere, where there was not only the people in the cockpit saw this UFO, but the passengers did. So that kind of leads me. I want to talk about the Channel Islands, but also, do you know of other cases where there were passengers involved in a sighting?
Can't think of one that involved passengers. The one that came to mind very briefly was a America West event. I think it was 1995 over the Southwest, where the crew definitely saw something. And I can't recall in that report if the passengers also saw something. But as far as other than the Channel Islands event, which you just mentioned, where there's some apparently miles-long object or something seen at some distance from the aircraft, I can't think of any recently where both pilots and passengers had an eyeball to eyeball with whatever was out there.
Well, let's talk about the Channel Island. For those people on YouTube, I'm just bringing up a graphic on that situation. Now, that's seems to be a very, very credible situation. Can you explain to the listener exactly what happened?
Well, I better be able to do that because I believe back in 2014 or 15, I was actually did a TV show on that with one of the, I think it was one of the History Channel ones. If you give me a minute, I can actually pull up my notes from that because I made extensive notes for that show. And this was Channel Islands. It was a fairly small aircraft. One of these, smaller than a commuter airliner. So the passengers could see the cockpit. It was like one of these, 4 6-seaters. The Channel Islands are a couple of small UK islands just off the French coast in the English Channel. Let's see.
And this is like a triple engine.
Some Triland or something.
Yeah.
Gosh. 2004. It was a Smithsonian Channel.
And this pilot is seeing something that looks like big yellow, almost like a big yellow bus.
It was larger than a bus. We're talking something that was,
up to a mile wide.
Significant. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And of course, right when I need to pull it, the computer's giving me all kinds of hassles here.
That's all right. So just from memory, I forget exactly how many passengers, but everyone saw it.
Absolutely. And it was reported to the requisite authorities. And the pilot was even interviewed on television more than once. So this wasn't something that was hidden. It was also something where I saw no real follow-up to it. That is, was there an explanation from the Civil Aviation Authorities in Britain or the AAIB, which is their equivalent of the NTSB? I've seen nothing about this subsequent to that.
Do you happen to know, in particular, I haven't looked into that case in a long time, but do you know in particular if those were, there was 2 of them, I believe, were they moving objects? Did they see them take off or anything like that?
I don't recall if they saw them in motion or in flight.
And do you know approximately how long that sighting lasted?
It was on the order of minutes, not seconds. And again, I can't remember the details of it. Later on in the show, if I can pull this up, I'll get back to you on that because, again, I did make notes about that. It was over 4 years ago, and I don't want to go on my memory too much beyond that, except to say that here was a situation which, had it happened in the U.S., I have a feeling that the pilots would have been far more reluctant to report this to the public. For example, this pilot, I saw nothing about his career being in any way impacted by the fact that he saw this.
Do you think that it helped him that he had witnesses that were, passengers?
Oh, absolutely. This is not something that they could pass off as this person has some sort of...
Sorry, I'm having trouble understanding right now. Please try a little later.
I should have unplugged my Alexa.
All right.
Alexa, stop.
Sorry, I'm having trouble understanding right now.
Okay, if that happens...
Please try a little later.
If that happens again, I'm going to unplug the thing.
Well, I've always heard we'd be taken over by artificial intelligence, so it's beginning. Yeah.
It's artificial. I don't know if it's intelligence.
And what some other notable cases? I believe I sent you a link to one in Arizona. I don't know if you looked into that. One
That's
in
right.
Oregon.
It was, the Oregon one, that happened just a few months ago. This was a high-flying aircraft or some sort of vehicle that was going between Northern California, Southern Oregon, going up toward Washington State. And this was something where there are several high-flying airliners who saw this, apparently from their estimate, only several thousand feet above their flight altitude and in the same general direction as north-south traffic on the West Coast. And this is something where, and again, the air traffic controllers didn't have any kind of transponder code on this thing. If this were a military aircraft, if this were a private company that had some sort of test vehicle, it would be, let's just say, the height of irresponsibility to fly it in or near a corridor that's occupied by airliners without telling air traffic control, without clearing this ahead of time with the FAA. So could this have been some rogue operator who was operating some vehicle up there? Certainly it could. But let's just say that the level of technology and effort it takes to get an aircraft in the stratosphere means that you're not going to have a single person fuel this up, maintain the aircraft, and get it up to altitude. If this were some sort of conventional vehicle, there had to be a group of people or some organization involved to get that airplane where it was. If it wasn't, if this was some sort of natural phenomena, well, it certainly didn't act like any natural phenomena I know of in the sky. Didn't act like a meteor, didn't act like ball lightning, didn't act like anything that made sense, given the verbal descriptions by these airline pilots.
All right, now I'm gonna go out on a limb and ask you a question here, and that you may be hesitant to answer. Do you think it is a possibility that we might be visited from another intelligence?
Certainly possible, but again, it's possible. Doesn't mean it's likely. Doesn't mean it's 100% certain that's happened in the past or that it could happen in the future. Certainly one could project the fact that there are billions of galaxies, not even to mention planets, that are out there, and that already in the past 10 to 15 years, various scientists have seen dozens, if not hundreds, of extrasolar planets, that is, planetary bodies orbiting around a sun other than our own that are out there. Some of them are even in what they call a habitable zone. That is, given the solar radiation string coming off of the star and the distance from that planet, it's the kind of distance that could possibly allow an atmosphere like Earth's to exist. So certainly, life could be existing elsewhere as we know it. Now, intelligence, that's a broader question. What constitutes intelligence? We just had Alexa a few minutes ago sort of interrupt our conversation. Oh, my goodness, I shouldn't
you
have
said the name.
Sorry, I'm having trouble understanding right now. Please try a little later.
Obviously, it is intelligence, quote unquote, if you can define it as such, especially if you're trying to sell stock in this company. But it's not necessarily an intelligence that we would respect or would fear. Does an intelligence like that exist? Possibly. Is there cybernetic kinds of intelligences that exist right now on Earth in a corporate sort of environment, or with things like the system I can't mention because it'll start responding, or similar systems from Google? Yeah. But is it an intelligence that could fly some sort of aerospace vehicle? Have no clue.
A number of, I guess, skeptics, and I don't say skeptics with the, like it's the bad word. I think it's good to have skepticism and to look at something, objectively instead of just, buying into, the fact that it's alien or whatever. But some skeptics will kind of go the other way a little bit too strong and just say that I had one on this show, Roger Nygaard, a few years ago. He's a filmmaker, and he was on, and he said that he thinks 100% of the UFOs that are seen are, secret military craft. Do you think that, I think it's very possible that some are, but do you think that there's a possibility of a lot of, unknown aircraft being linked to the military or like you said, private contractors?
Well, it's very easy to speak to the secret military aircraft. The answer is it's not 100% because, as you just mentioned, sometimes you have a private contractor who, on speculation, builds something that they're trying to sell to the military. It's not a military aircraft. It's not even a developmental aircraft for the military if there's no contract signed. So now, and there have been these things in the past. So now 100% of these unknowns are not military aircraft or military projects. Could they be projects made by human beings? I would say a good fraction of them are. Would I say 100%? No, because there are some things that are out there that turns out to be not vehicles. For example, getting back to jets and sprites again, that wasn't a lightning type of event, but let's say you have something that's more like ball lightning that somehow, for whatever reason, behaves in a manner consistent with some sort of lighted craft for some period of time. You can point to that and say, hey, this looks just like a secret military aircraft with some plasma around it. No, it's ball lightning. So I wouldn't say 100% on that. Do I have any evidence to say that it's 60%, 40%, and 10%? I don't. Simply because it's what I call the numerator and denominator problem. We don't have the numerator. We don't have the total number of events that are anomalous. We don't have the denominator, the total number of events including the anomalous ones. There could be many secret military aircraft flights that happen that we don't know about. So it won't be in the denominator. So no, we have no real way, in my opinion, of making a reasonable estimate as to what fraction of these are military aircraft or military programs.
Good answer, thank you. So I want to just take a little sidestep just for a few minutes here, and I want to talk about airline safety, and
certainly,
and in general, because I know that over the years it's gotten better and better, but when you hear about a crash, everybody knows about it. But currently, like on any given day, how many flights would you say there are around the world? Would you be able to throw out some ballpark stats for us?
Boy, I would be able to throw.
Whoop. Not sure what happened to your Skype. All right. It's not on my end. So hang on, everyone. Looks like his Skype is frozen. And so while we're working on that, if someone would like to call in, I will try to. Let's see how I can do this here. I'm going to try to hang up. If anyone wants to call in, please do. That phone number is 603-967-4030, and we're going to try to get him back. So, all right, go ahead and change that if you would. Let's see. So, I apologize to the listener on YouTube. I'm not sure what happened to his Skype. Just all of a sudden just froze. And let's see. Go back to him. And I'll try to hopefully just hang up on him. I believe I did that. And I'll try to call him back. And meanwhile, if anyone wants to call in, that phone number's up on YouTube. Anyone's welcome to give us a ring and either pose a question for our guest coming back, hopefully, or just talk. If anyone wants to call in and talk about a sighting that they had, I'm always interested in hearing about a sighting. So if anyone would like to ring us about that, that number is 603-967-4030. And give us a call. Let me go back to Skype here and see what's going on. Okay, I will try him again. It looks like it's possible that his internet went down. That is a possibility. Try him back right now. Okay. Well, it's not ringing through. Try again. So we have a half hour left, and let's see. So I'm asking again, once again, anyone out on YouTube want to give us a call? Talk about what we're talking about in general. We have someone calling right now, and it still looks like we're having trouble with the guest. ringing through to his Skype. So, caller, thanks for calling in. What's your first name? Where are you calling from?
This is Linda from New York. I thought maybe I'd provide you with some information while you're hanging there.
Is this the Linda?
This is the Linda, yes. How are you?
Good. Can I say do you mind if I say your full name?
Oh, absolutely. No problem.
All right. This is Linda Zimmerman. Now we have someone else calling in. You're going to have to wait, other caller. Linda, thanks for making the call. Unless I do have to take this call in case it's our guest.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah. Hang on just 1 minute. Okay. Caller, what's your... you have your radio on. Please turn that off.
There you go. Sorry.
Okay. So this is not the guest. Would you mind hanging up? I have someone on right now. Looks like our guest came back too. Everyone's coming back at the same time. So you're back. What happened? What happened, Todd? I see your lips moving, but I'm not hearing you. So you may have to reboot. Why don't you reboot your, Todd, why don't you go ahead and reboot your, okay, he's gone. Linda, now that I have you on, thanks for joining the call. Thanks for filling in. I appreciate that.
No problem. I actually do have an interesting aviation-related case that someone just sent me about 2 weeks ago.
Oh, excellent. Just to keep in mind, just keep this in mind, Linda, that our guest may call in any minute. So I would like to join him when he does.
Whenever you need to.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. No, I want you to stay on, though. So because I want you to talk about this with him as well. So go ahead.
Okay. Well, she was on a flight back from Ghana in Africa. She was there on business. She's a scientist, so a very credible person. And she's looking out the window and she sees that it's a night flight. She sees this beautiful, what she thought was the full moon. And she had two windows, one over the wing, one to the right of that. And she said it was just the most stunning view of this full moon. And she's watching it for close to an hour, and then she watches as it slowly sinks behind a cloud bank. And she was so enamored with this. She remembers the next morning she emailed her sister saying, I just had the most amazing experience, the light of this full moon. Well, that night she's home in New York, and she's doing some chores. She looks out the window, and there's the crescent moon. It was only an 8% crescent, and she's like freaking out. How can this possibly be? I just saw the full moon on my flight yesterday. So she called me up knowing what I do, and, I asked her a series of questions. Well, did you see any craters or the seas on the moon? And she realized she never saw any sort of surface features, just this beautiful, bright light tracking her plane for almost an hour. And this was the first experience like this she ever had, and she didn't quite know how to deal with it, so I said, it wasn't threatening, you enjoyed it, I think you should be consider yourself fortunate.
Did she, do you happen to know if she talked to anybody else was she alone, traveling alone?
She was traveling alone, yes,
Mm-hmm.
and she didn't mention it to any other passengers, and I asked if she took any pictures, and she said, well, why should I? It was a full moon, as far as she knew.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was remarkable, and I didn't see any other cases over that part of the Atlantic, but it was the next night that the Irish sightings took place.
Wow.
So, not really close. I don't know what track they took, but I would think from Africa to New York. Didn't go anywhere near Ireland, but still, something unusual was certainly going on in the sky at that time.
Now, Linda, you've been a guest on the show a number of times, and and you've become, you've listened to a lot of shows, and you've helped me out a number of times. So if you want to tell, I'm just waiting to see if our guest is back.
Certainly, I will hang up then.
Well, before you hang up.
Before you.
Yeah, Todd, so you're back. I'm sure it was the government that shut you down, wouldn't you think so? Must have been.
Yes, I'm former NSA. Yes, there's some sort of secret society I should have paid the dues to, but no, I didn't pay the dues, and this is what I get for that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So we're on with Linda Zimmerman. She is a researcher in upstate New York, and she was just telling a tale. Briefly, I'll just tell if you wanted to say hi to her. This person contacted her, and saying they was watching the full moon for up to an hour outside of their window of their flight from Africa to New York, and when she got home, she noticed that it was a crescent moon. So it was some type of object she was looking at for up to an hour. Interesting, huh?
Very interesting. We were talking from full moon, what appeared to be a full moon, to a crescent moon, which means unless you had some sort of missing time event, it wasn't the moon.
Major missing time, like 30 days, 20 days. So. Exactly. Well, Linda.
Well, I will let you get back to your guest. I'm enjoying what you're saying. Thank you very much for being on, and enjoying the show as always, Martin.
Thank you, Linda. I appreciate that. Yeah.
All right. Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
So
my apologies to yourself and to your guests for the technical failure, which was all my fault. My power cord was out, and the darn thing drained out without me noticing. Power cord's back in now.
Oh, okay. I probably should have went over everything with you like that. Now, I was wondering if it might have been, I don't even dare to say Alexa. That might have done it. Don't repeat that. Yeah.
I will not repeat that.
Yeah. So one more question came in. Do you think the recent incident over Ireland that we were talking about, reported by the media that included audio of the pilot's conversation, could have only been released as a result of this subject having more credibility? And what the listener is talking about is, the UFO field has changed a little bit since the New York Times article came out last year in December. And so, what do you think about that question? Do you think UFOs have more credibility now?
With respect to this particular case, I don't believe that enters into it at all, because thanks to the technology of the internet and other changes in air traffic control communication technology, there are air traffic control conversations that are streaming live around the world as we speak, and being recorded by various private individuals and groups, to the point that when an event happens, let's say, for example, a few weeks ago, when the airplane was stolen in Seattle, there was air traffic control conversations of that were released almost immediately by various private groups. I believe Live ATC was one of them. And this was without going through the FBI, without going through law enforcement. So I believe this was a case with the Irish event as well, that this conversation was in the clear. That is, it was picked up and recorded on the fly and released that way. So what I think this is an indicator of is, in the future, if there's some sort of major event where there's air traffic control conversation, even if it's an unexpected event in an obscure part of the world, that conversation will be reported and will be out there sooner than anything.
It must be kind of boring, though, to listen to. I mean, for instance, what is the pilot's famous saying? There's 12,000 hours of boredom in 1 second of horror, or something like that. I don't know exactly what the saying is, but I've heard it. But people wouldn't really notice. You're saying it's monitored, but do people really listen to it? I mean, what are they listening for?
There might be people out there who are so into aviation they would listen to it. I'm not one of them. But this is the kind of thing where, again, if some newsworthy event happens in some area, it might be something where, it might have been recorded for several hours, and people will go back and listen closer to those recent recordings and see if there's anything that stands out. And again, this is air traffic control conversations only. For example, between the aircraft and air traffic control, the internal conversations within the cockpit would not be on this. The internal conversations within the air traffic control centers or the control tower or what have you is not going to be there either. It's basically only the radio communications. And it only includes voice. It doesn't include the data transmission that may be going on in the background.
Okay. I understand. I had someone on I don't know, a couple of years ago that was talking about drones, and she said that the U.S. government is installing a new type of tracking system, and it's she gave an enormous price tag. Is this anything you've heard about? It's going to be a whole new way of tracking planes.
Of tracking. Well, there is all sorts of. There's always evolution going on with respect to how the FAA does air traffic control. One of them that has been going on for quite some time is a move to what's called ADS-B, which I used to know the acronym off the top of my head, but it's basically a way of tracking aircraft that's going to be relying less on monitoring the transponder responses to radar interrogations and more to do with ongoing communication between the aircraft and air traffic control centers, using satellites, using ground stations, using a variety of means to get the information between the airplane and air traffic control and back.
You know that the crash a few years ago where the plane was just vanished. They had no idea where it was and searched. You know the one I'm talking about.
MH370.
That's right. Okay. So there, of course, whenever something dramatic like that happens, conspiracy theories come out everywhere about it. And one of them was someone was touting online that it was an alien abduction. Of course, those type of things come up after a while. If you look for them, you can find them. In that situation, I know they found pieces of the airplane, but that's highly unusual that they just absolutely have. It's off the radar and gone.
Well, there's several things about that event that are highly unusual. Basically, the early part of the flight was quite normal. It was transiting from, I believe it was Kuala Lumpur toward China, and it basically made a left turn over the South China Sea and passing over some areas, including one city that was the maintenance base for Malaysia Airlines. So the speculation might have been, well, maybe there was a problem. They were trying to go to the maintenance base. The aircraft was painted by military radar, I believe, in Thailand and one other country, as it was going over that part of Southeast Asia. So they had some tracking of it until it went out into the Indian Ocean. And basically, the direction it took was such that if you wanted to find a lonelier, less traversed part of the world, you could not do much better than where this airplane apparently ended up.
Wow.
This is the part of the world that is not heavily trafficked in ship traffic. It was never a hot spot during the Cold War. So unlike the North Atlantic between North America and Europe, you don't have all sorts of sound equipment on the seafloor, listening for submarine screws and that sort of thing. So the kind of military presence you have in the North Atlantic, where something explodes into water, it'll be heard, that wasn't available in the Indian Ocean. And fortunately, because of the communication system that was on the aircraft, which was capable of, although they didn't have the system in place, to send regular technical transmissions from the aircraft back to home base. There was basically a basic once-an-hour signal that was beeped out from this airplane, and the Inmarsat system, picking it up on their satellites, they were able to later figure out, based on when these signals arrive at the satellites, they back-figured where this aircraft could have been. And they basically had it narrowed to a strip of ocean that was an arc. I can't remember how many miles long, but basically an area of the ocean that was roughly the size of Pennsylvania is where they had been looking for the aircraft a few months ago and didn't find it yet. But conspiracy theories aside, the best available evidence was the Inmarsat signals that basically specified a part of the Indian Ocean where this aircraft might have stopped flying.
Wow. Well, that's a real mystery. I heard something about the possibility the pilot may have had some emotional issues, but no one, that may be another conspiracy. Go ahead.
Oh, there were four basic theories I came up with based on the limited data that was out there. And these are the four theories I had within a week or two of this plane disappearing. One was an old-fashioned hijacking. Some outside entity takes over the airplane. Second, an insider hijacking, kind of like what happened with the Germanwings aircraft in 2015, I think it was, where the pilot locked out the other pilot and deliberately crashed the airplane. You have a normal complex accident. That is the kind of accident that happens in modern aviation, in airliner aviation, where, in spite of all the sophisticated systems and procedures in place, some combination of events or situations took place where there was no real way to deal with it. There was no system in place. There was no procedure in place. The crew did everything they could to keep the airplane in the air, but didn't bother to communicate with the outside world because they were too busy trying to fly the plane. And the fourth one, which is basically, these are not in isolation. I think it's a combination of one of the first three plus the fourth one. The fourth one being, at some point during the flight, the crew or whoever was flying the aircraft was either unwilling or unable to make any changes to the flight control system or the autopilot system. And it just kept flying at a nice steady altitude, nice steady speed until it ran out of fuel.
Oh, boy, that's scary. All right, so I do want to talk, before your internet crashed, your computer crashed there, I did ask you the question if you can talk a little bit about stats. How basically, just throw some figures out that you are aware of, first of all, like how safe is flying, commercial flying?
Well, it's safe. I'm glad you said the word safe. Safe is like beauty. It's a subjective concept that's in the eye of the beholder and depends on context. I've actually jumped out of an airplane once as a skydiver, and only once. Was it safe? I thought so, otherwise I wouldn't have done it. Was it risky? Much more so than being a passenger in an airplane. Is the risk acceptable? It was to me at the time, which is why I thought it was safe. It was unacceptable to virtually anyone with any sense, and it would have been considered to be an unsafe event.
Sorry, I'm having trouble understanding right now. Please try a little later.
Is there a way? How difficult is it for you to get up?
There is a way.
Yeah.
Not difficult at all.
It's just saying one key word there that's waking up, waking her up. So, poor Alexa. All right, we're getting feedback now. All right. Okay,
Technical problem solved.
Yeah, okay, you're back. All right, good.
How many
Thank you.
engineering degrees does your guest have, and he can't get his podcast gear to go straight? What's wrong with this guy?
A good thing you're not flying the plane, right?
Thank God. That's why I was an engineer, not a pilot.
Yeah. So I just basically want to, I've heard of people throw out things like, it's you have much more of a chance of getting into an accident going to the airport than you do flying a plane, and millions of planes are, in the air per year or all that stuff. I mean, at any given time, there's thousands of them, tens of thousands of them in the air, right?
At any given time during the main part of the flying day, there could be on the order of 9,000 airliners flying with like 1.2 people in the air constantly as we speak.
Yeah.
Again, we're talking about a situation where you have tens of thousands of aircraft, airliner aircraft, flying every day around the world. Of course, various time zones and such. Assume that you have an average passenger load of 100 people. Depending on the time of day, you could have well over 1.5 million people airborne in the sky. In the U.S., 2017, according to the FAA, passenger airlines only had about 8.6 million flights. And this is 8.6 million flights over 365 days. So we're talking about, again, tens of thousands of flights per day. And sorry, my calculator in my head isn't quite working right. And so 8.3 million divided by 365. That's how many we have going on. How many times does it result in a disaster? And a disaster, in my book, does a single passenger get killed during the flight? Well, in 2018 or 2008 in this country, we actually had one happen for the first time in a long time. There was a Southwest airliner flying near Philly. There was a rapid decompression event which happened after there was an uncontained engine failure. Piece of the engine hit a window. Window pops out. Unfortunately, one passenger was pulled out of the aircraft and ended up dying. That was the first passenger fatality in the U.S. on even a U.S. or a non-U.S. airliner since 2013. That was the event in San Francisco with the Asiana 777. And there you had roughly 99% of the people survive. There were 3 people killed, 300 plus, roughly 300 people who survived that. You would have to go back to 2009 in the United States for the last time you had an airliner crash killing everybody on board. That was roughly a month after the Miracle on the Hudson event that we've all heard of the movie Sully. Personally, I haven't seen it because I can't stand movies like that. Go figure. And no one got killed in the Miracle on the Hudson. Everyone got killed a few weeks later in the Buffalo crash. Now, around the world, the situation is not the same because let's just say that the infrastructure that other countries are using vary wildly. Western Europe, North America, Australia, Japan, they have all the latest and greatest equipment in use. They also have the strictest regulations, and the regulations aren't very different between international flying and domestic flying. Without getting too fine a point on it, each nation is responsible for the regulations they have within that nation when it comes to flying. When it comes to international flying, there's a set of standards that every nation adheres to. If you don't adhere to it, it's likely you won't get landing rights in a second country. So international flying has a level of risk that's, I would say, universally low. That is the likelihood of flying on a flight that is an international flight, relatively low, higher when it comes to domestic flying.
Yeah, I know we're off the UFO topic, but I still want to just get a little bit of this in. In the training that I had, I remember, the conception of ditching is, you land in water, everything's cool, but it's not cool. It's like you land in water, it's something like 90% chance that you're going to not make it.
Funny. I'm glad you mentioned ditching because it also speaks to, when it comes to anomalous events, how you define things will determine whether or not you count something as being in that category or would color your idea of how often it happens. I actually looked up one day on the FAA website, what's the definition for ditching? I couldn't find one. I thought, this is a basic concept. I should see it in the Airman's Information Manual or one of the glossaries. I couldn't find one. So I came up with my own. Basically, is there a chance of someone drowning if the thing sinks? Now, planes land in water all the time, running off the runway, etc. Maybe it's shallow water. Planes crash in water all the time. But very rarely do you have a classic ditching. That is, the flight crew deliberately says, we're going to put this airplane in the water, and they put it in the water.
Yeah.
The Miracle on the Hudson was only the fourth time I could find in the history of jet aviation where that definition of ditching happened.
Amazing. I think we have about 4 minutes left, somewhere around there. I want to talk quickly about one other flight where there's been a crash, where there's been a lot of conspiracy, and that's flight TWA. We have 4 minutes left. TWA 800 off of Long Island. There's been movies written about it, lots of stories where people think that was shot down possibly by error from the military. What do you know about that particular crash?
That happened in July 17, 1996, literally 2 weeks to the day after I started airsafe.com.
Really?
Which, so it was like a real education there because I saw the internet in its infancy responding to aviation crashes. I was at Boeing Safety Engineering at the time, and our department supported our field investigators, so we were in deep on that one. That was a subtle problem, and to make a long story short, there was some sort of fuel-air mixture in the center fuel tank that exploded. Prior to that event, the basic understanding in the industry was that it wasn't possible to have a combination of temperature and pressure and fuel density, aerosol density, to cause an explosion, even if you had a ignition source. That was wrong. There was an underlying assumption when it came to design of aircraft that was proven wrong by that event. Subsequent designs have taken steps to inert the fuel or to take other steps to make that kind of event not happen again. So yeah, it was heavily investigated. Conspiracy theories aside, it was overwhelming evidence that it was an accident due to a not complete understanding of how explosions happen in a fuel tank.
It's just I guess we might have a problem. Let me just see. We've had a few of them. Huh? No, they still. Okay, it's on. It just went out a bit there, but we're all set. We're going to keep moving here. Whoops. And
if I may take 20 seconds to pull that back into the UFO area.
Yeah.
That was a key for Flight 800. there was a concerted effort to actually use the data that was out there, do research on the data that had been done before, to try and figure out what's the answer to this question. What the heck is it, and how did it happen? If you put that kind of effort, even 1/10 of the effort, toward resolving things like the Irish event or the Phoenix Lights or the event that happened recently in Northern California and Oregon, then there would be better answers out there than what we have now, which is mostly speculation.
Yeah, right. Well, hey, we're just about right at the end of our show. We have just about a minute left here. So I do want to thank you so much for being on the show this evening. And so the name of your website is airsafe.com.
Is airsafe.com, your location to go to for information about airline safety and security, giving the public good information since 1996.
Wow, that's a long time for a website to be around.
It is very a long time, and I didn't have gray hair back then.
All right. Well, it's been entertaining, and thanks so much. Oh, just one other quick thing. You do a podcast there, too, as well sometimes, right?
On very rare occasions, the conversation at airsafe.com. And as we spoke off the line earlier, one of these days soon, I'll resurrect it for the first time in several months to have a certain former flight attendant on my show.
All right. Sounds good. All right. Thanks a lot, Todd.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, everyone. So that's it for our show. And thank you so much for listening. And I thought it was fascinating. I hope you enjoyed it, too. And we'll be back next week with astronomer Mark D'Antonio, a repeat guest. Always a lot of fun. So we'll be talking about all kinds of things and back next week. And thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. And thank you for your support. And remember to keep your eyes to the sky.